You know that feeling when you're trying to type out an urgent email or maybe you're just really in the zone brainstorming a project and your brain is just moving at a million miles an hour?
Oh yeah, the absolute cognitive bottleneck.
Exactly. You have these perfectly formed, brilliant sentences already queued up in your head, like the thought is fully baked. But then to actually get it into the physical world, you have to route all of that lightning fast cognition down through your nervous system, into your arms, down to your hands, and out through your clumsy, fumbling fingers onto a plastic keyboard.
Right, which feels agonizingly slow.
It really does. I mean, it
Yeah.
is literally like trying to force a fire hose of information through a tiny coffee straw.
And that is actually the ultimate bottleneck of modern computing. I mean, we've spent the last 50 years building these incredibly fast, hyper-optimized machines and these massive digital networks. But our physical bodies, our hands, our vocal cords, they remain the absolute speed limit.
Yeah, we're basically analog parts,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you think about it, we are functioning as analog peripherals trying to keep up in a strictly digital world. The human brain can process conceptual information at staggering speeds, but the moment you have to translate that into keystrokes, you just lose all that momentum.
Right. It's a fundamental biological speed limit. But what if that coffee straw just didn't exist at all? What if you could bypass the fingers entirely?
Which sounds like science fiction, I know.
It does. But imagine just thinking the words and they instantaneously appear on the screen, like a completely frictionless transfer from mind to machine. We are exploring a massive foundational paradigm shift today because a newly unstealthed Silicon Valley startup called Sabi thinks they have figured out how to do exactly this.
And they are betting their entire existence on the idea that you'll be wearing a mind-reading beanie by the end of this year, 2026.
Welcome to the deep dive. The mission for today is to break down a comprehensive technical and strategic analysis report titled Sabi and the Rise of High-Density Neural Interfaces.
Right. And the core premise Sabi is operating on is what we really need to unpack today, because they are attempting to fully commoditize the decoding of your inner monologue into digital text.
Commoditize being the key word there.
Exactly. But the absolute crux of their approach, the thing that separates them from, the sci-fi horrors we usually associate with mind reading, is their non-invasive first philosophy. They want to turn the human mind into a high-speed input device, but with zero neurosurgery. No drills, no implants, no medical facilities.
Right, because if I have to get my skull sawed open to clear my inbox faster, I'm just going to stick to the keyboard.
Yeah, I think most people would.
So whether you're someone constantly looking to optimize your daily productivity, or you're just intensely curious about the rapidly approaching future of human-computer interaction, understanding this non-invasive hypothesis is crucial.
Because Sabi isn't some fringe lab experiment. I mean, they have a massive war chest, a wildly ambitious roadmap, and they're aiming directly for your desk.
Right, but to really grasp how they plan to read your thoughts through a thick layer of bone and hair, we first have to look at the incredibly specific, almost unorthodox DNA of the company itself. And a good place to start is just clearing up the name.
It is worth clarifying immediately, because if you start searching for Sabi in medical or tech databases, you will hit a lot of false positives.
Oh, I bet.
We are not talking about SABI in all capital letters, which is the Society for Advanced Body Imaging, a highly respected radiology organization.
Yeah.
And we certainly aren't talking about lower cases followed by capital ABI, which is a common medical abbreviation for severe acquired brain injury. Sabi, the entity attempting to replace your mouse and keyboard, is strictly focused on consumer-grade hardware.
And when you look at the architect of this company, CEO Rahul Chhabra, you really realize why the consumer angle is so aggressive.
Oh, totally.
Because usually when you hear about a breakthrough in neurotechnology, the founder is a career academic. You picture a lab scientist who spent 30 years in a university basement studying like the firing rates of macaque monkeys. But Chabra doesn't fit that mold at all.
Not even slightly. I mean, he is an alumnus of BITS Pilani. He holds an MBA from Harvard, and he actually spent his early career in high finance at Citigroup.
Wow, the Citigroup.
Yeah. From there, he didn't go into a biology lab. He went into corporate scaling. He had scaled an enterprise firm to an $8 billion valuation, and then acquired and ran a highly successful seven-figure consumer brand. He is a master of the market, not a neurologist.
See, I think that detail is the absolute skeleton key to understanding why this technology is suddenly moving so fast. When you have a CEO whose background is high finance and consumer scaling, you get a ruthless product-first mentality.
Exactly.
This isn't a science experiment searching for a commercial application. It's a commercial product that demanded a scientific breakthrough. They designed this from day one to sit on a shelf at Best Buy.
And that product-first vision is exactly why they have managed to attract such staggering amounts of capital. The venture capital ecosystem, specifically firms like Coastal Ventures, recognized that Chhabra was treating the brain-computer interface, the BCI, not as a medical device, but as the next iPhone.
Right.
Vinod Khosla has actually been very explicit about the underlying investment thesis here. He argues that true paradigm-shifting scale requires reaching billions of healthy everyday users.
Because you just cannot reach a billion healthy users if your user manual starts with, step one, check into a hospital for brain surgery.
Exactly. The total addressable market for invasive neural implants is severely limited by the inherent risks of surgery. It's confined to individuals with severe medical needs like locked-in syndrome or advanced ALS, but the total addressable market for a non-invasive wearable hat, it's literally anyone who owns a computer. And that logic has triggered an absolute gold rush. Between mid-2025 and early 2026 alone, we saw about $1.75 billion pour into neurotech equity funding.
$1.75 billion. That is an astronomical amount of money in less than a year. But the way that money is being distributed is equally telling, right? Like, it's not sprinkled evenly across 100 scrappy startups.
No, not at all. The venture capital landscape right now is operating on a brutal power law distribution, meaning a microscopic handful of companies are capturing almost the entirety of that $1.75 billion.
Because it's so expensive to even start.
Right. The reality is that the technical hurdles of neural decoding are so monumentally difficult that a $2 million seed round won't even cover the computing costs, let alone the hardware R&D. Investors are essentially anointing a few heavily armed champions and giving them massive financial war chests to go solve the problem.
Okay, so Khosla and others throw billions of dollars at Chhabra. They build the war chest. But venture capital can't bribe the laws of physics. They still have a fundamental biological barricade between their hardware and the user's thoughts. How is it physically possible to read a delicate brain signal through a thick human skull without a drill?
Right. That is the defining challenge of the field. It's known in neuroscience as the EEG inverse problem. To understand it, we really have to look at what electroencephalography, or EEG, actually is.
Okay, let's break that down.
When the neurons in your brain communicate, they fire off tiny electrical impulses called action potentials. When millions of them fire together in synchronized patterns, they create electrical potentials strong enough to ripple outward. EEG tries to record those ripples using conductive sensors placed on the scalp.
But the journey from the brain to the scalp is a nightmare for a delicate electrical signal, right?
A complete nightmare. I mean, before those tiny electrical ripples ever reach a sensor, they have to travel through the brain's heavily folded tissue, then across a layer of highly conductive cerebrospinal fluid, then through the dense resistive bone of the skull, and finally through the skin and hair of the scalp.
Wow.
By the time the signal actually arrives at the surface, it is severely dampened, smeared out, and completely distorted.
I'm trying to picture what that actually looks like from a data perspective. It feels like, okay, imagine you're trying to listen in on one specific, quiet conversation happening between two people inside a massive, crowded banquet hall.
Okay.
But you aren't allowed inside the hall. You are standing outside, in the street, pressing a glass against a thick, sound-dampening concrete wall.
That's a great way to think about it.
Right. Like you might hear the low rumble of the crowd, you might hear a sudden burst of muffled laughter if the whole room erupts, but isolating the exact syllables of one specific conversation from the far corner of the room, it seems physically impossible.
That is a phenomenal analogy for the inverse problem. You have the muffled rumble on the outside of the concrete wall that's your scalp sensor picking up a voltage spike. The inverse problem is the sheer mathematical agony of working backward from that muffled spike to calculate exactly which tiny cluster of people inside the room actually shouted.
Ah, I see.
Because of how the skull smears electricity, a spike on the left side of your head might have actually originated deep in the right hemisphere. The math required to map the source accurately from just a few external data points is incredibly complex and, honestly, often ambiguous.
So if the concrete wall of the skull is fundamentally distorting the signal, how does Sabi get around it? because they're promising a pristine, highly accurate signal without knocking a hole in the wall.
They're essentially attacking the physics problem with overwhelming brute force. They call it the spatial scaling law. If we go back to your banquet hall analogy, if you have one or two or even a dozen microphones crusted against that concrete wall, you're just getting useless noise.
Right.
But what if you could plaster the entire exterior of the building with 100,000 hypersensitive microscopic microphones?
Oh, wow. Wait, so you aren't just listening harder. You're listening from literally every conceivable microscopic angle simultaneously.
Precisely. To put this in perspective, a high-end clinical EEG system, the kind you'd see in a top-tier neurology ward, requiring a technician to scrub your scalp and glue electrodes to your head with conductive paste, typically uses anywhere from 64 to maybe 256 individual electrodes.
Okay, 256.
Sabi's consumer device is utilizing between 70,000 and 100,000 miniaturized sensors.
Going from 256 sensors to 100,000. That isn't just an iteration, that is an entirely different category of hardware.
It is a massive, unprecedented proliferation of sensors. By recording the smeared electrical potentials from tens of thousands of slightly different overlapping vantage points at the exact same millisecond, Sabi's system can use advanced spatial filtering algorithms to triangulate the origin of the signal.
So they're faking it, basically.
Exactly. They're using volume to synthetically recreate the precision of a surgically implanted array, entirely from the outside.
But wait, if clinical EEGs require a technician to scrub your skin and use that gross, sticky conductive gel just to get a signal from 256 electrodes, how do you possibly get 100,000 sensors to work on a consumer's head? Like, nobody is going to apply medical gel to 100,000 individual points on their scalp every morning before checking their email.
And this is exactly where the product-first mentality of the team really shines. They recognize that the user experience of traditional EEG is just atrocious. So the hardware they've developed for what they call the Sabi cap, which is debuting as a knit winter beanie, relies entirely on miniature dry electrodes.
Dry electrodes, so no paste, no saline solution, no skin preparation.
None at all. These sensors are woven directly into the textile fibers of the beanie. They're engineered to make sufficient contact through the hair just by the natural tension of the fabric.
That's wild.
And the physical engineering is staggering. The entire cap is waterproof, breathable, and thermally controlled to keep the electronics from overheating. But the absolute wildest claim they are making is that this highly sophisticated 100,000 channel brain-computer interface is entirely machine washable.
You can throw your mind-reading device into the washing machine with your hoodies. That is absurd.
It sounds crazy, right?
It does, but honestly, it's brilliant. If you want this to replace the mouse, it has to be as low maintenance as a mouse. You don't perform maintenance on a computer mouse, you just use it. But surely, weaving 100,000 dry sensors into a piece of fabric creates a massive data integrity issue.
Yeah.
How do they actually get the data off the hat?
You've hit on the exact engineering nightmare that plagues traditional EEG. In a hospital setting, those 256 wet electrodes have long wires running off the patient's head to a massive amplifier machine sitting next to the bed. But in physics, a long wire carrying a tiny electrical signal acts exactly like an antenna.
Ah, so the wires themselves start picking up background interference.
Massively. They pick up the 60 hertz hum from the overhead lights, the radio frequencies from nearby cell phones, even the static electricity from someone walking across a carpet. It completely corrupts the delicate brain signal.
So how does Sabi fix that?
Their solution is to process the signal right at the source, millimeter by millimeter.
Yeah.
They utilize custom ASICs, which stands for Application-Specific Integrated Circuits.
Let's break that down for a second. An ASIC is basically a microchip designed to do one highly specific task incredibly fast, right? Like how Bitcoin miners use ASICs designed only to mine Bitcoin.
Exactly. Instead of sending the raw, fragile brain signal down a wire to be processed later, Sabi has embedded thousands of these microscopic ASICs directly into the fabric of the beanie alongside the sensors.
So the processing happens on your head.
Right. The moment a sensor picks up a microvolt of brain activity, the ASIC immediately cleans, digitizes, and amplifies that signal locally before it travels anywhere. By digitizing it at the source, they completely eliminate the antenna effect. Interference can't corrupt a signal that has already been converted into binary ones and zeros.
Okay, so let's summarize where we are physically. I am wearing a washable winter beanie. Inside this beanie, 100,000 microscopic dry microphones are pressed against my head, listening to the muffled rumble of my brain through my skull.
Right.
The moment they hear something, custom chips instantly digitize and clean the noise. But that brings up a monumental question. We now have 100,000 channels streaming high-dimensional digitized noise. How on earth do we make sense of it? Having 100,000 microphones outside the banquet hall is great, but you still have to untangle the overlapping audio.
Yeah, hardware scaling is only half the battle. If
Yeah.
Sabi stopped there, they would just be delivering an ocean of pristine static. The actual magic, the translation from thought to text,
Mhm.
relies entirely on the software. This is where Sabi introduces their brain foundation model.
A foundation model. So we are talking about the exact same architectural principles behind large language models like the AI chatbots everyone is familiar with.
Precisely. The breakthrough in artificial intelligence over the last few years has been the transformer architecture, which excels at finding hidden patterns in massive, chaotic data sets. Sabi essentially built a neuro-LLM.
A neuro-LLM, that's a great term.
Yeah, instead of scraping the internet to feed text into an AI, they collected roughly 100,000 hours of high-density brain recordings from a diverse group of about 100 human volunteers.
100,000 hours. That is an unbelievable data set for neural activity.
It is totally unparalleled. Just like an LLM ingests billions of sentences to learn the underlying grammatical structures and probabilities of human language, Sabi's model ingested 100,000 hours of electrical data to learn the universal neural signatures of thought. It is looking for the structural commonalities in how the human brain encodes language.
Why is this foundation model approach so critical for a consumer? Like, why couldn't they just use older, simpler machine learning algorithms?
Because of the plug-and-play dilemma. Historically, brain-computer interfaces were a calibration nightmare. The way your brain physically encodes the word hello is neurologically distinct from the way my brain encodes it.
Oh, because our brains are physically different.
Exactly. Our brains have different shapes, different folding patterns, and different synaptic connections. In older systems, every time a new user put on a headset, they had to sit in a chair for weeks, painstakingly training the software to recognize their specific idiosyncratic brainwaves.
Like having to teach a computer an entirely new, deeply personal language from scratch every single time a new person logs on, that completely kills the consumer appeal. I mean,
Right.
imagine buying an iPhone and having to teach it how to register your thumbprints by tapping the screen for a month.
It just wouldn't work. So Sabi's foundation model is designed to bypass that entire grueling process.
Mm.
Because the AI has analyzed 100 diverse brains over 100,000 hours, it has ostensibly identified the shared universal baseline of human neural communication. The goal is that when you, a brand new user, pull the Sabi cap out of the box and put it on your head, the AI already knows enough about human brain patterns to let you start typing almost immediately, with zero calibration.
That sounds like a miracle, but I know there is a massive biological roadblock to this plug-and-play dream. The inner workings of the brain aren't static. It's not a hard drive where data sits in a fixed location forever.
No, definitely not. You're referring to representational drift, which is arguably the most stubborn, frustrating phenomenon in all of neurotechnology.
What exactly is drift?
Well, your brain is highly plastic.
Yeah.
It's constantly rewiring itself, forming new synapses, pruning old ones, and shifting how it distributes workloads. Because of this, the neural pattern you generate when you think the word apple on a Monday morning will look mathematically different from the pattern you generate when you think avel on Tuesday afternoon.
Wait, really? The exact same thought, less than 48 hours later, produces a different electrical signature.
Yes. And the drift doesn't just happen over days. It happens over hours, sometimes minutes. It happens because you learned something new or because you're experiencing mental fatigue.
That's wild.
The data shows that even just drinking a single cup of coffee fundamentally alters the background EEG activity of your brain, which shifts the baseline the AI is trying to read.
Okay, that is wildly complex. If I drink an espresso, my brainwaves change, and suddenly the hat doesn't know how to spell my name anymore. The AI has to be incredibly dynamic to handle that. It's not just learning your brain once. It has to constantly adapt in real time. It's chasing a moving target while you are actively trying to work.
That is the immense burden of Sabi's cloud-streamed inference pipeline. The cap itself isn't doing the heavy lifting of decoding the text. It is streaming that pre-cleaned data up to Sabi's centralized servers, where massive compute clusters constantly update the model weights to adapt to your specific drift.
Okay.
The pipeline actually executes a highly sophisticated four-step decoding process in real time.
Let's walk through those 4 steps because it really crystallizes the journey from an abstract thought to a physical word on a screen. Step 1 is signal denoising.
Right. Even though the ASICs on the hat cleaned up the environmental interference, the radio waves, and the power lines,
Mm.
the system still has to contend with biological noise.
Mm.
And biological noise is incredibly loud.
Like what?
Well, every time you blink your eyes, or swallow, or subconsciously clench your jaw, your facial muscles generate massive spikes of electrical activity called EMG, or electromyography.
And since the muscles are right next to the scalp, they must completely drown out the delicate brain waves underneath.
They do. A jaw clench is like a lightning strike compared to a thought.
Yeah.
So step one requires the AI to utilize that massive 100,000 channel density to isolate and mathematically subtract those muscular artifacts, leaving only the pure neurological data behind.
Wow. Okay, so once the blinking and jaw clenching are scrubbed away, step 2 is source triangulation.
This goes back to our banquet hall analogy. The AI analyzes the timing and amplitude of the signals across the thousands of sensors to calculate precisely where in the brain the activity originated. And it is specifically looking for activity in two crucial areas, the motor cortex and the auditory cortex,
Why those two specifically?
because that is where the physical and auditory planning of speech occurs. Once it isolates those regions, it moves to step 3, phonetic reconstruction. And this is a vital distinction. The AI is not looking for entire words. It is looking for phonemes.
Phonemes being the smallest fundamental acoustic units of human speech.
Exactly. The sharp K sound in cat, the drawn-out E sound in C. The AI detects the neurological preparation to make those specific sounds. It identifies these tiny building blocks of language as they fire in your brain.
But a string of raw phonemes can be really ambiguous, especially if the brain signal is slightly muffled, which is why step 4 is the glue that holds it all together, semantic synthesis.
This is where the LLM architecture really shines. Let's say the system decodes the phones for the sounds, TA, and a vague, messy signal that might be an M or an N.
Right.
The semantic synthesis engine looks at the surrounding context of the sentence you are trying to write. It acts exactly like the predictive text on your smartphone, but infinitely more sophisticated and happening at the speed of thought.
Oh, I see.
It calculates the statistical probability of what you meant, realizes you were trying to type the word than or that, and seamlessly stitches the phonemes into the correct contextual word.
That is a staggering amount of processing happening in fractions of a second. But this brings up an incredibly practical question. We know how it works physically, and we know the software pipeline. But what is the actual user experience? What is this technology actually listening to inside my head?
It's a great question.
Because I have a lot of thoughts bouncing around that I definitely do not want typed into a work email.
Right. That is a very common fear. But it stems from a misunderstanding of what the cap is targeting. The Sabi cap is not reading your passive imagination.
So it's not looking at my daydreams.
Exactly. If you are sitting there vividly picturing a sunset on a beach in Hawaii, the visual cortex is firing. But the hat ignores it. It also isn't capturing your abstract emotional states or your subconscious anxieties.
So it's not a literal mind reader pulling my deepest secrets out of the ether.
No, absolutely not. The scientific foundation Sabi is building on, which actually draws heavily from groundbreaking work at institutions like Stanford's Neural Prosthetics Translational Lab, is strictly focused on decoding inner speech.
Inner speech. So the conscious, deliberate formulation of words in your head.
Exactly. Think about the voice in your head right now when you read a book silently, or when you rehearse a conversation before you have it. When you think to yourself, I need to buy milk, without ever opening your mouth or vibrating your vocal cords, your brain is still lighting up the motor cortex. It is neurologically preparing the muscles of your tongue, jaw, and larynx to speak those exact words, even though you suppress the final physical execution.
Wow.
You are generating a highly specific, repeatable motor plan. That motor plan is what Sabi is intercepting and decoding.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. It's intercepting the command just before it reaches the mouth. But when we look at the performance metrics Sabi is claiming for this inner speech decoding, I really have to pause and push back. The initial communication speed they are targeting for launch is 30 words per minute with what they call reasonable accuracy.
Yes, 30 words per minute is their stated benchmark.
Wait, 30 words per minute? I type on a standard physical QWERTY keyboard at about 70 words per minute. Professional transcriptionists hit 120. And natural out-loud verbal speech flows at roughly 150 words per minute.
Go.
Why on earth would I spend hundreds of dollars to wear a washable winter beanie just so I can artificially slow my brain down to 30 words per minute? It defeats the entire premise of the fire hose.
It is an entirely valid criticism, and it is the exact hurdle their marketing team will have to overcome. If you compare it strictly to a seasoned pipist, it sounds like a downgrade. But if we evaluate this through the lens of historical BCI development, we really have to radically reframe what 30 words per minute actually represents.
Okay, reframe it for me.
For a completely non-invasive system, something that rests entirely outside the skull, dealing with the massive distortion of the inverse problem, achieving 30 words per minute, isn't just a minor step forward. It is a historic, unprecedented, almost unbelievable benchmark.
So you're saying I shouldn't look at it as a slow keyboard. I should look at it as a miracle that the signal got through the skull at all.
Exactly. It is the starting line, not the finish line. The goal for this first iteration is simply to prove the non-invasive hypothesis at a baseline level of actual practical utility.
Yep.
30 words per minute is fast enough to send a quick text message, or command a smart home, or navigate a menu without feeling overwhelming frustration. Once they establish that beachhead, scaling from 30 WPM to 60 or 100 WPM becomes a software optimization challenge, not a fundamental barrier of physics.
Okay, I can accept that it's a foundational stepping stone. But there is another major usability hurdle we have to discuss, which I found absolutely fascinating in the report. They refer to it as the Midas touch problem.
It's a brilliant piece of terminology. King Midas wished that everything he touched would turn to gold. It sounds like an amazing superpower till you sit down at the dinner table, try to eat a piece of bread, and it turns into solid metal and breaks your teeth.
Right.
The BCI equivalent of that curse is the lack of an off switch for your thoughts.
Right. If the cap is constantly intercepting my inner speech, how does it know the difference between me actively wanting to dictate an email and me just privately thinking to myself? Like if I'm staring at a blank Google Doc, actively typing a report, but then a stray thought crosses my mind like, man, I really want a turkey sandwich for lunch. Does the cap just jam the word sandwich into the middle of my professional document?
That exact problem has plagued BCI interfaces for decades. Traditionally, invasive systems bypass this by requiring the user to employ a mental passcode or a mechanical trigger.
How does that work?
You'd have to consciously think a highly unnatural trigger word, or imagine forcefully clenching your left fist to tell the computer, okay, wake up, start listening to the next thing I say, and then you'd have to imagine clenching your fist again to turn it off.
Which completely shatters the illusion of a frictionless interface. If I have to do mental gymnastics just to hit the spacebar, I'll go back to the keyboard.
Precisely. So, Sabi claims to have solved this by developing an always-on gatekeeping model. According to Chhabra, their AI foundation model can implicitly read the intention to communicate.
How is that biologically possible? How does an AI measure intent?
It relies on the understanding that there is a distinct, neurologically detectable signature for communicative intent. When you are casually daydreaming to yourself or internally debating what to have for lunch, the brain utilizes certain default mode networks.
Okay.
But when you actively formulate a thought with the express intent of projecting it outward to another entity, even if that entity is a digital document, your brain engages slightly different supplementary motor areas and attention networks.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it literally fires differently when it knows it's talking to someone else.
The HATS AI acts as a continuous gatekeeper, analyzing the context of the brainwave and only allowing thoughts encoded with that specific outward intent signature to pass through to the screen. That is mind-bending. The AI is literally sitting between your subconscious and the screen, deciding which thoughts you actually meant to share. But to truly grasp the monumental stakes of Sabi's 30-word per minute intent reading beanie, we have to zoom out. We need to look at the broader, highly aggressive landscape of neurotechnology. Sabi is making a lot of noise, but who else is in this fight?
The competitive landscape is fierce, and the best way to understand it is to look at a tier list organized strictly by the level of invasiveness, like how far into the human body are these companies willing to go to get a good signal.
Right. Let's start at the top.
At the absolute extreme end, you have the intracortical systems.
This is where the household names operate, right? Companies like Neuralink, founded by Elon Musk, and competitors like Paradromics.
Yes. These systems rely on penetrating microelectrodes. This requires highly specialized neurosurgery, often involving robotic assistance. They remove a portion of the skull, peel back the protective durameter, and physically insert hundreds or thousands of microscopic flexible wire threads directly into the gray matter of the brain.
The physical intrusion is massive, but the trade-off is performance.
Unmatched performance. Because the sensors are sitting directly alongside the firing neurons, they completely bypass the skull and the inverse problem. The signal is pristine. They are currently demonstrating data rates around 10 bits per second, which allows for incredibly fluid, multidimensional control of digital cursors and rapid text generation.
But the risk profile is equally massive.
Absolutely. You are dealing with open brain surgery, the risk of acute infection, and the long-term biological response.
Right, because the body fights back.
Exactly. The human brain does not like foreign objects. Over time, the immune system often attacks the microelectrodes, encapsulating them in scar tissue, which slowly degrades the signal quality until the device eventually fails. Right now, this tier is strictly limited to patients with profound medical needs, like quadriplegia.
Okay, so intracortical is the highest risk, highest reward. What is the next step down on the invasiveness tier list?
The middle ground is endovascular BCI. The most prominent pioneer here is a company called Synchron, with their Spentrode device. They recognized the dangers of open brain surgery and found a backdoor. Instead of drilling through the top of the skull, they deliver the sensors through the jugular vein in the neck.
Like a cardiac stent.
Exactly like a cardiac stent. They navigate a mesh tube lined with 16 tiny electrodes up the vascular system until it rests inside a blood vessel sitting directly adjacent to the motor cortex.
That is incredibly clever. You don't have to cut through bone or touch the actual brain tissue.
It is a phenomenal compromise. It carries significantly lower surgical risk than penetrating electrodes, while still getting the sensors inside the skull for a much clearer signal than an external wearable. Then, just below that, you have ECOG, or surface arrays. A key player here is precision neuroscience.
How does their approach differ?
They use subdural films. These are incredibly thin, flexible microelectrode arrays that look like a strip of yellow tape. A surgeon makes a microslit in the skull and slips this film just underneath the bone, resting it gently on the surface of the brain.
Oh, I see.
It doesn't penetrate the tissue, so it causes minimal damage, but it sits close enough to capture incredibly dense, high-resolution data over a wide area.
Still requires a surgeon, still requires a scalpel, but much less destructive than jabbing wires into the gray matter. And then finally, at the bottom of the invasiveness tier, we arrive at the non-invasive wearables.
Right. This is the domain of companies like Neurable, who integrate sensors into over-ear headphones, or Emotive, who make consumer headbands. But historically, these devices only use a handful of electrodes, maybe fewer than 20.
That's a huge drop-off from 100,000.
Yeah, and because of that low sensor count, they cannot do complex neural decoding like typing words. They are limited to identifying broad, generalized mental states. They can tell if you are focused or meditating, or they can map a massive, simple spike in activity to a basic trigger in a video game.
And walking through this tier list perfectly illuminates Sabi's radical strategy. They're trying to forcefully bridge the gap between the extremes. They're adamantly staying in the safest, zero-surgery, non-invasive wearable category with the consumer headbands, but they are trying to synthetically replicate the high-bandwidth performance of a surgical implant by jumping from 20 sensors to an unbelievable 100,000 sensors.
Exactly.
They want the safety profile of a pair of headphones with the clinical power of a neural implant.
And we absolutely must highlight the therapeutic impact of that approach. Sabi is pitching this to venture capitalists as a massive consumer productivity tool to replace the mouse. But if they actually achieve what they are promising, the medical implications are arguably more profound.
Without question. Think about individuals living with ALS or locked-in syndrome or severe spinal cord injuries.
Currently, for those severely paralyzed individuals to regain the ability to communicate, they have to undergo the risky intracortical surgeries we just discussed. And even then, they are often tethered by cables to bulky, immobile hospital equipment just to process the data. Right. If Sabi can deliver a reliable, consistent 30 words per minute of text generation using a completely non-surgical, untethered, wireless piece of clothing, it would fundamentally restore autonomy and mobility to millions of speech-impaired patients worldwide. They could communicate freely from anywhere, without risking brain surgery.
It is genuinely life-changing, terror-inducing technology. It is a beautiful vision. But, and this is a massive, incredibly dark, but it brings us to a very sharp pivot in our deep dive. We have to look at the shadows this technology casts.
Yeah, we have to.
Because if we suddenly live in a world where millions of healthy people are wearing highly accurate AI-powered mind-reading beanies that are constantly streaming their innermost thoughts to a centralized cloud server, what could possibly go wrong?
It opens up the single most terrifying privacy and regulatory nightmare of the 21st century. The implications of this technology are so severe that they challenge our fundamental definitions of human rights.
Let's start with the architectural vulnerability. Let's talk about the digital master key. because Sabi's entire plug-and-play magic relies on that massive brain foundation model, and that model doesn't live on the hat. It lives in the cloud.
Exactly. Now, Sabi is incredibly aggressive in their public relations about security. They clearly state that all neural data streamed from the cap is heavily encrypted. It is encrypted in transit as it travels over Wi-Fi, and it is encrypted at rest when it is stored in their servers.
Right.
But encryption only protects the data from outside hackers trying to intercept it.
Right, because for the AI in the cloud to actually do its job to analyze the brainwave and translate it into a text message, it has to decrypt the data. You can't run complex inference on encrypted noise.
Precisely. The inference happens in the clear on Sabi's centralized servers, which means Sabi holds the digital master key. They have ultimate unrestricted access to your raw, unencrypted neural patterns.
And machine learning practitioners, privacy advocates, and ethicists are sounding the alarm in a massive way. Because we are not talking about a company logging your Google search history or tracking your GPS location or even scanning your fingerprint.
No, this is entirely different.
This is the final frontier of privacy. This is your actual real-time, unfiltered thought process. It is the most intimate data a human being can possibly generate.
The practical fears are immediate and severe. Consider the legal implications. What happens when a government agency or a local police department issues a subpoena to Sabi for your raw neural data? Can you be compelled to testify against yourself if a server logs the neurological intent of a crime?
That is terrifying. Or look at the commercial side. What happens if Sabi, or whoever inevitably acquires them, decides to monetize that data stream? Imagine an advertiser who doesn't just know what links you clicked, but actually has a profile of your subconscious neurological reactions to their products.
Right.
They could measure exactly how much anxiety or desire a specific political ad generated in your amygdala. And inevitably, what happens when there is a catastrophic data breach at the data center hosting the raw, intimate thoughts of 10 million users? You can change a compromised password. You cannot change your baseline neural signature.
It's a terrifying prospect.
Yeah.
And global governments are not waiting around to see how it plays out. They are reacting preemptively. For instance, the nation of Chile has already taken the historic step of proactively amending their national constitution to explicitly protect cerebral activity and neural data as a basic, inviolable human right.
And it is reaching the highest levels of executive power globally. In the United States, the White House was officially briefed in late 2025, specifically regarding the national security and privacy implications of mass-market consumer neurotechnology.
Lawmakers understand the threat vector. But the privacy risk isn't just about someone reading your thoughts. There is an entirely separate, equally massive medical privacy risk.
The risk of health discrimination. Because a device that streams 100,000 channels of electrical data from your brain isn't just a fancy microphone for words, it is a continuous, high-definition medical monitor.
Yes. Neural signals are incredibly dense with biological information. A high-density EEG can reveal fundamental truths about the physical health of your brain architecture. These signals contain early biological markers for severe neurological conditions, diseases like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, or epilepsy.
Wow.
And crucial to understand here, these electrical markers often appear in the data years before any physical symptoms ever manifest in the patient.
Put yourself in that scenario. Imagine you go to Best Buy, you purchase a Sabi cap because you want to clear your inbox faster and boost your productivity at work. You feel perfectly healthy. But the AI running in the cloud detects a microscopic recurring stutter in your motor cortex data.
Right.
The algorithm flags it. Sabi servers now know that you have early-stage Parkinson's disease. Your primary care doctor doesn't know. Your spouse doesn't know. You don't even know. But a tech company server knows who owns that realization.
And how is it used? That is the biometric privacy loss nightmare. If that data is aggregated or sold, could your health insurance premium suddenly skyrocket based on a diagnosis generated by your winter hat?
Oh, man.
Could an employer mysteriously pass you over for a high-stress promotion because a third-party data broker flagged your neural data as showing signs of early cognitive decline?
It is a total minefield. It means Sabi isn't just fighting an engineering battle. They're fighting a brutal war on two separate regulatory fronts. On one side, they have to navigate the FDA because the device possesses undeniable therapeutic and diagnostic capabilities.
Absolutely.
On the other side, they have to navigate the FTC and consumer protection agencies over these unprecedented privacy issues. All while trying to convince the average consumer that wearing a mind-reading hat is a cool, convenient lifestyle choice.
It is a monumental hurdle. Many industry analysts suggest that to survive the regulatory backlash, Sabi will eventually be forced to abandon the cloud completely. They will have to move toward federated learning or secure on-device enclaves.
Meaning, the heavy lifting, the actual AI decoding of your thoughts, happens entirely locally on a dedicated microchip physically located inside the hat, and the raw brain data never leaves your physical person.
Exactly. The hat only transmits the final approved text string to your computer, keeping the raw neural noise locked away. But despite all these massive privacy hurdles and ethical debates, the venture capital engine demands progress. The technology is moving forward at breakneck speed. Which brings us to the future roadmap. Where is Sabi going next, and who is chasing them on the global stage?
Well, structurally, the most immediate next step is moving beyond the beanie.
Which is an absolute practical necessity. A thick-knit winter beanie is severely limited by geography and climate. You cannot wear a wool hat in an office in Miami in July and expect the thermal controls to keep 100,000 active microchips from melting.
Right, so they are actively prototyping a baseball cap variant, which opens up the form factor to year-round global mass adoption. But the technological roadmap is far more ambitious than just changing the style of the hat, and far more ambitious than just typing words onto a blank screen. Sabi's ultimate vision is a paradigm they call thought to action.
This is where the integration with modern artificial intelligence reaches its peak. Right now, Sabi's model is simply a translator. It decodes your inner speech into a text string. The next logical evolution is taking that text string and feeding it directly into an autonomous software agent.
So the AI agent executes complex, multi-step tasks based on your high-level intent without you needing to micromanage the steps.
Exactly. Let's look at a concrete example of how this workflow would operate. Imagine you are wearing the baseball cap at your desk. You pull up a 50-page financial report on your monitor. You don't type anything. You simply look at the document and generate the inner speech. Generate a bulleted summary of this document, highlight the key risk factors, and email it to the entire marketing team.
Sabi intercepts that thought and decodes it into text.
Yes, and then Sabi hands that text instruction seamlessly via API to an AI reasoning model running in the background, something akin to OpenAI's advanced O-series models.
Okay.
That reasoning model acts as your digital proxy. It analyzes the document, utilizes its own logic to draft the summary, identifies the risk factors, autonomously opens your email client, formats the text, populates the correct email addresses for the marketing team, and sends the message.
All initiated by a single fleeting thought. You didn't touch a mouse, you didn't touch a keyboard, you didn't even speak out loud. The software agent acted as an extension of your intent.
That is the true, ultimate frictionless interface that Chhabra is aiming for. The complete collapse of the boundary between human desire and digital execution. But it is vital to recognize that Sabi does not have a monopoly on this future. The geopolitical neurotech race is accelerating rapidly, and the competitors are massive.
It is not just scrappy Silicon Valley startups anymore. Sovereign nations are prioritizing this. China has officially included brain-computer interface technology as a critical frontier technology in its 2026 government work report.
Right.
They view neural decoding as a matter of national strategic importance, and they are funding massive, aggressive clinical trials in innovation hubs like Chongqing.
And on the corporate side, the tech behemoths are fully awake to the threat. Meta, for example, is not sitting idly by while a startup tries to redefine human interaction. Meta's fundamental business relies on frictionless social connection, so they have been pouring immense resources into non-invasive neural decoding.
Really? I didn't know Meta was that deep into it.
Oh yeah, they have been making massive strides using a combination of magnetoencephalography and high-density EEG to decode speech. Recent data shows they have already achieved up to 80% accuracy in character reconstruction from non-invasive signals in controlled settings.
So the giants are awake, the international competition is fierce, and the billions of dollars are flowing. Which brings us to the synthesis of this entire deep dive. When you look at everything we've unpacked today, Sabi really represents the ultimate do-or-die test of the entire non-invasive hypothesis.
It does. Their success or failure rests entirely on the execution of three distinct pillars. First, hardware scaling. Can 100,000 microscopic sensors actually brute force a solution to the physics problem of the human skull?
Right.
Second, AI generalization. Can a foundation model trained on 100,000 hours of data truly enable a seamless, out-of-the-box, zero-calibration experience for any human being on Earth? And third, form factor. Can they successfully hide an extraordinarily complex piece of medical-grade technology inside a washable, everyday piece of clothing that consumers actually want to wear?
If Sabi succeeds across all three pillars, if they actually pull this off by the end of the year, it permanently alters the trajectory of our species. It fundamentally erases the boundary between thought and action. It makes the physical keyboard as obsolete as the typewriter.
It really does. Yeah.
But if they fail, if the signal remains too noisy or the drift is too severe, it might prove that the skeptics were right all along. It might prove that we absolutely must embrace the surgical drill and the microelectrode implant to achieve true high-bandwidth neural computing.
Either way, Sabi's impending launch marks a massive historical inflection point. It is the moment that neurotechnology officially graduated from the sterile confines of the laboratory and violently entered the chaotic realm of mainstream consumer electronics.
And that is exactly why this matters so deeply to you, the listener. This isn't abstract science fiction set 50 years in the future on a spaceship. This is consumer hardware heavily funded by the biggest names in venture capital launching late next year. The absolute end of the keyboard, the death of the mouse, might very well be a washable winter hat sitting next to your coffee mug.
As we close this out, there's one final, almost philosophical idea embedded in the implications of this technology that is crucial to mull over.
Okay, lay it on us.
It has to do with the inevitable feedback loop of a brain-computer interface. If our inner monologue is constantly being monitored, intercepted, anticipated, and synthesized by a predictive AI model, a model that acts as an active gatekeeper, constantly deciding which of our private thoughts deserve to become physical actions, will that continuous daily interaction eventually change the way we naturally structure our private thoughts?
Oh, wow.
When our deeply plastic, highly adaptable biological brains inevitably mold themselves to better communicate with the machine that is actively adapting to us, whose voice is really doing the speaking.
Wow. It really brings it all back to the fire hose and the coffee straw. Once you remove the clumsy, fumbling fingers and you allow the machine directly into the rushing stream of your conscious mind, you really have to wonder if the machine eventually starts directing the current. Something profound to think about the next time you are furiously typing away at a blank screen. We'll see you on the next deep dive.